Everyone may have heard of different software development methodologies such as the waterfall, agile, scrum, Kanban, but maybe there's one variation of agile that's less common or less well known, and that's called DSDM. DSDM is formerly known as the Dynamic System Development Method, and it's an agile method that focuses on the full project lifecycle. It provides the best practice guidance for on-time, on-budget delivery of projects with proven scalability to address projects of all sizes for all businesses. Built into the framework are 8 principles: focus on the business need, deliver on time, collaborate, never compromise quality, build incrementally from firm foundations, develop iteratively, communicate continuously and clearly, and demonstrate control. As we're focusing across the whole project, the initial kickoff will involve sitting down with the client to understand the project objectives and the high-level requirements expected to be completed within the time frame. This process might be completed as part of a workshop over 1 day or 2 days, in which we'll get some high-level features, different screens that may be required, understanding the business constraints and the business processes that are currently in use, and how this solution may improve the business moving forward. With this information, we can then go away and do a bit of a deep dive and further understand what's required, any risks, any complexity, anything we've missed during the initial kickoff. From here, we can ask the questions to the client and resolve those issues. And from here, develop what we call a time box. The initial time box could be described as how long do we think the entire project will take to deliver from when we kick off until when it's in production ready for use. The advantage of doing this is that we can get some initial feasibility as to whether the project can go ahead or not. That might be based on the amount of time that the client expects the project to take. It might be the amount of budget that the client has put aside for the project. And if all things go well, then we can kick off into the next stage, which would be refining this initial time box. As with all agile methodologies, one of the key focuses is on iteration of phases throughout the life of the project, and DSDM is no exception there. Once we have a large time box for the entire project at a high level, we can then break that down into features that are of highest importance and work our way down and build time boxes for each of those. We'll then kick off development and then testing and deployment, so we get a working product iteratively throughout the whole project. It's important to note that these time boxes are estimated on actual time and not story points, as you might find in other agile methodologies. And this is important for clients in particular who have come up with a set budget that they are willing to invest and they need things done by a certain time. We can at least then answer the questions: when is this going to be done by? Are there any risks? And if there are risks, what's the overflow? As we break each time box down into little mini time boxes and start development on those features contained within, we take the rule of thumb that 80% of the value of the solution can be delivered with 20% of the effort. This is a pragmatic approach where everything doesn't need to be perfect from the outset, but good enough that it fulfills the business needs and that they can move forward with the rest of the project and start getting value as early as possible. This doesn't mean that we ignore adding the polish, the perfection, the gold plating to the application. It just means that we delay it until the application's at a workable state and delivering value to the business. This means we don't end up with a highly polished, perfect 1 feature out of 10 that the business has in that time frame. Rather, we have 10 out of 10 features that they can use. They're not 100% polished, but we can go back and polish them afterwards. Now, how do we get to this stage within the process? Now, breaking down a time box into a little bit more detail and describing the process on how we actually get to a deployable product or feature, we will start by adding what we call cards to a Kanban board. Now, a Kanban board is a tool that we use to visually depict work at various stages of the process, and a card is in effect a task that we're going to complete in that process. Different stages within that process might include requirements gathering, development, testing, ready for deployment, or done. Each card will have all the requirements documented within itself so that they can be referred to at any time. They'll also include any commentary, questions, findings from experiments or investigations contained with them. So you'll see a full history of what's happened with that task over the course of time. It will also have the estimated time for completion, whether that's 1 day, 5 days, 1 week. As collaboration is a big part of DSTM, as the cards move through the Kanban board, the client or the stakeholder is encouraged to be highly engaged and participate within the progress of those cards. So that might be there to answer questions and discuss the requirements. Once the card reaches a certain level of completion, to be involved with the testing and even be involved with the creation of any documentation and how it relates to the business and any existing business processes. Once this time box of work has been completed, then the process will restart. A new mini time box from the larger initial time box will be created. New cards will be placed on the Kanban board and they'll be moved across. As they're moving across, the focus is always on those cards that are closest to completion to be worked on, so that we're not always starting on new work and not completing work, but making sure that whatever work is started is actually completed and delivered. Now, how does this differ to something like Scrum? Now, this might be a little bit contentious. The development team won't be looking at the project in its entirety from the outset, but they will have multiple sprint planning sessions throughout the project. Each sprint planning session will involve the entire team, and they will go through different requirements, features that need to be implemented, and estimate and prioritize that work. Without using any time measurements or metrics, they will use what we call story points to estimate the tasks, and these story points typically correlate to the amount of effort required to complete that task. Now, you can use different methods of assigning story points, or they could be a Fibonacci sequence, there could be a doubling of numbers. It's up to you, as long as each value is relative to the previous and next value. So if you had a task that was estimated to be worth 5 story points and another was worth 10 story points, then you would expect the second one worth 10 to be double the amount of effort of the first. Now, this shouldn't correspond to time, because a 5 story point effort could take 3 hours to implement, or it could take 6 hours to implement. The important part is it's related to effort. You then work out how many story points can be completed within a sprint. Now, a sprint could be a 2-week block, or it could be a 3-week block, and the number of story points that you complete is your velocity. Using that velocity, you can then look back and say, well, of those 20 story points that we completed, the next sprint will aim to allocate 20 story points worth of work in the next sprint. Now, the argument could be said that story points do in fact have a relation to time. The fact that we have 20 story points within 2 weeks of completion says that 20 story points equals 2 weeks of time. And that could be theoretically used as an estimate. So why do we use story points? It's so that different developers of varying degrees of skill and ability to type code quickly can have a equal level of involvement in the estimation process. So across the board, all the developers may say that this piece of work requires twice as much effort as the other piece of work, but whether that equates to 10 hours or 20 hours is irrelevant. The difficulty, though, moving forward is if all the developers within the team change, then the historical velocity based on all the previous sprints is a little bit out of whack, and can't always be used to correctly gauge what future estimates will be. The other difficulties you'll find are the clients or the stakeholders, because they have a business to run, they have a limited budget. They will still come back and say, when is this task expected to be finished? How long will it take? How much will it cost? It's a little bit difficult to say it's going to be completed with 50% effort of the sprint. It's not really something that's tangible. And when there's deadlines within a business, they need to know where is their money being spent and when are they going to get the product they've purchased. There's also the issue with billing. A lot of clients will be expecting a fixed price upfront cost for the project, and this is understandable. Imagine trying to build a house and the builder says, we don't know how much it will cost. We'll work through all your requirements and what you would like to include within the build, and when we're finished, we'll give you a final bill, or we'll charge you on a month-to-month basis until it's finished. There's no way to budget. There's no way to understand what the expected cost will be. You don't know if the builder is purposefully delaying the project at the expense of you and having to pay more for the build. So that's where the upfront fixed cost is quite desirable for the customer. You may have noticed that the actual entire development team is involved in the sprint planning, typically in a Scrum project. This again is an added cost to the client, where you may have 5 or 6 developers all using their time at once to estimate and plan for one particular task that all may not be involved with. This is in direct contrast to how DSTM would work, in that the developers individually can have the authority to estimate a particular task as well as work on it. They also have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the team in the best interest of the project and the client to expedite the development and ultimately decrease the cost of development. With all of this in mind, we can take away that the DSTM methodology can deliver the right solution at the right time and ultimately at the right cost. This can all be achieved when all the stakeholders, including the developers and the clients, understand and buy into the business vision and objectives. They're empowered to make decisions within their own area of expertise. They collaborate to deliver a fit-for-purpose business solution, collaborate to deliver to agreed timescales in accordance with business priorities. They accept that change is inevitable as the understanding of the solution grows over time, and that a level of common sense and pragmatism is adhered to throughout the project by all those involved. The team here at Cubisoft follow DSTM, and if this is something that sounds attractive to you, contact us to discuss your next project and see how this development methodology can make your project a success.